Hello everybody, I'm Mango Thunderslice, and today we are talking about the Irish origins of civilization. Now this video is entitled How the Redheads Built the Pyramids, Part 1, because, I'm trying to get more exposure for this topic. I see a lot of people talking about things, there's a lot of people waking up now and seeking the truth, but I still don't see this information being reflected in people's statements and worldview. And I think it's very important, especially with, all the crazy current political environment, racial issues, class issues, sex issues, whatever. And it's all basically this fracturing of the human psyche that doesn't see itself as part of a coherent, unifying network for the species and beyond the species, right? And I think that when we examine the Irish origins of civilization, especially as put forth by Michael Tsarion here, this is really, really illuminating stuff when you understand the true history of our people. And, it's again losing this, delusional mentality that basically our ancestors were just a bunch of, savage naked apes who were dumb. So dumb that they built pyramids and megaliths and moved 2,000-ton stones like at Baalbek in Lebanon, right? But they're just a bunch of naked savages, right? Our history is a fiction. The one that we're told in the universities and the schools, it is not true at all. And what's funny is all of the megaliths, all of these ancient stone structures are living constant proof that that narrative is a total fiction. And, I feel like this topic gets kind of swept under the rug, and specifically Egyptology, right, is a highly controlled academic discipline. Right, the narratives within the study of Egypt and the symbols and the religion and all those icons is highly circumscribed by the typical, academic elite. Right, they are covering up our history because if we were to know it, we would not be governable, right? We would be only governed by the truth, which is, suffice to say, not exactly desired by the reptilian brotherhood. And I don't necessarily mean that in the alien way. I'm just saying that there's people on this planet who have a reptilian mindset, right? Setting aside all the crazier alien stuff, not saying one way or the other with all that, but we can explain almost all of the historical conundrums and the megalithic sites not just by jumping to aliens, but by looking at our own true history as human beings, right? So here we are, the Irish origins of civilization, an alternative history of Ireland and the world by Michael Tsarion. Now I'm going to be buying this book today. This is something that's really been on my mind, and now that the Kavanaugh circus is over, I think I'd like to, jump in there and start a narrative in a new direction before the media, outrage machine proceeds on in its next, crazy, wild screech fest, But anyway, here we go. So this is kind of a landing page. Truth and Oblivion. A short time ago, a worldwide cataclysm precipitated the fall of advanced pre-Diluvian civilizations. Mighty continents sank beneath towering waves, were swallowed by the gaping earth, or obliterated by ferocious natural forces. By colossal error, the scattered remnants of pre-Diluvian civilizations are taken for the nascent ones of the so-called historical period that ostensibly commenced approximately 8,000 years ago during the early Neolithic epoch. Although the earliest Mesolithic and megalithic sites of the world proved to be more sophisticated in design and construction than those of later date, most people continue to accept the unsustainable fiction concerning the world of the past. Ancient man was primitive and modern man is civilized. That is what the majority of people believe. It is, however, one of the most egregious fallacies conceivable. A second cataclysmic wave, so to speak, has likewise swept from existence august druidic colleges that once operated throughout the world. These colleges had been restoring, for the good of all, elements of technology from a devastated bygone age of the gods. These colleges and their creators are equally lost, buried, and forgotten. In the place of primordial sanctums of knowledge and culture, There arose institutions and teachings that seek not to improve and enlighten, but confuse and mislead. They are established over sites where servants of truth once inquired into the workings of mind and soul, world and cosmos. It might be said that history is the story of the conflict between the servants of truth and the virtueless ones, between magicians and sorcerers. The obliteration of the gnosis of the primordial caste of elders was a man-made holocaust largely unknown today. It is this calamity that has damaged and oppressed the peoples of the world more than any series of natural disasters, terrible as they might have been. To the elders of old, a twisted, darkened mind was a horror worse to behold than a broken, lightless world. And that's an excerpt from Volume 2. And essentially, there are two chapters that Michael Tsarion provides as a sample of the book, and I find them to be very powerful. I thought I'd share with you them today, and then when I have the book, I'll be able to share more of the information as I move through it. Volume 1, Chapter 10, The Disciples of Horus. The land we now call Egypt was colonized, and was originally peopled by fair Celts from the shores of Britain. This was the exodus of the Aryans, some of whom returned later to their primeval homes. Quote by Commons Beaumont, Riddle of Prehistoric Britain. Another quote, classical archaeologists are in agreement that ancient migrations did take place in prehistoric times, although they often tend to be rather hazy about the dates and the countries involved. That was Ralph Ellis from Jesus, Last of the Pharaohs. We learn from official sources that the symbols found throughout Western countries, on flags and state regalia, etc., come from spurious migrating Semitic tribes. We are told that the symbolism originates with these tribes and goes back to the dawn of time. We also know what dawn of time means officially. We know it refers to the period between 7,000 and 11,000 years BC. However, as we are now beginning to realize, these dates do not mark the beginning of mankind's cultural and technical history. Herodotus himself is on record as having been told by contemporary Egyptian priests that their written records went back no less than 12,000 years. Eusebius, the early Christian bishop of Alexandria, calculated Manetho's recorded history as taking Egypt's civilization back 35,525 years. Other records, both cultural and historical, were far more ancient still. That was a quote by John Gordon, in Egypt, a child of Atlantis. Horus, from Har, Hari, Hor, or Heru, was a god of the sun primarily associated with southern Egypt and the ancient city of Hierakonpolis, the city of the hawk, or hawks. In one earlier dynastic era, he was referred to as the Distant One. The letter H was used as the, as in orizon, meaning prayer, becoming horizon. Therefore, Hari would really have been the Ari. Horus was he of the Ari. The root Ari can be found in the word aristocracy, referring to a noble, enlightened elite. The term is misused today by those with no right to it. One of Horus's titles was Horus of the Blue Eyes. Quote by E.A.W. Budge. Nekhen, Hierakonpolis, was the religious and political capital of Upper Egypt at the end of the pre-dynastic period, and probably also during the early dynastic period. It was the center of the cult of the hawk god Horus of Nekhen, which raised in this city one of the most ancient temples in Egypt, and it retained its importance as the cult center of the divine patron of the kings long after it had otherwise declined. The original settlement on the site dates from Nakada I, or the late Badarian. At its height, from about 3400 BC, it had at least 5,000 and possibly as many as 10,000 inhabitants. The ruins of the city were originally excavated towards the end of the 19th century by the English archaeologists James E. Quibble and F. W. Green. In the principal deposit of the Temple of Nekhin, they found important ceremonial proto-dynastic artifacts such as the Narmer palette and the famous mace head bearing the name of King Scorpion. Although equally magnificent temples and megaliths exist in Ireland, Scandinavia, North America, and Mexico, although entire lost cities are found beneath the oceans, and though the vast majority of words, place, and personal names in the Bible are of Irish origin, we rather live with mysteries and unsolvable conundrums that face the earth. In almost every case where a major site exists, we would rather live with mysteries and unsolvable conundrums than face the truth. In almost every case where a major site exists, or where a great civilization existed, we find the same refrain from the modern inhabitants. Either we are told that godlike strangers erected the sites, or that technically superior semi-divine ancestors, of whom we now suspiciously find no trace, did it. Archaeologists refuse to explain who these mysterious ancestors were. The world over, legends affirm that indigenous forebears were not the builders, astronomers, and healers. Investigators habitually look to every country except Ireland for their answers. It is almost comical to say that we can be certain that Ireland played a seminal role merely because the laws of exclusion are in its favor. All other countries have been studied and can be struck off as originators of civilization. So dare we now, at long last, face the truth that has lain in plain sight for so long? Dare we examine the evidence for the Irish origins of civilization and have done with the damnable conundrums? Another quote. The ancient Egyptians were fully aware of the 25,920-year cycle of the precession of the equinoxes. The idea, however, that a nomadic group of hunter-gatherers about 5,000 to 6,000 years ago should suddenly, within the space of a few hundred years, or even a millennium, from merely watching the night sky but without using any instrumentation, be able to quickly develop the requisite mathematical and scientific knowledge to verify such a hypothesis is patently ludicrous. And that was from John Gordon, from Egypt, Child of Atlantis. One of the most important finds within the land of Egypt occurred when Egyptologist and archaeologist Professor Walter B. Emery was excavating tombs at the necropolis of Saqqara, one of the oldest cities in the land. Professor Emery discovered the remains of men with blonde hair and fair complexions. These individuals were revered by the Egyptians as a gifted elite. Vittorio de Cesare and Adriano Forgione write about Emery's enigmatic discoveries in their article Malta, Skulls of the Mother Goddess. The famous Egyptologist, author of Archaic Egypt, discovered the remains of individuals who lived in the pre-dynastic epoch. These presented a dolichocephalous skull larger than that of the local ethnic group, fair hair, and a taller, heavier build. Emery declared that this stock wasn't indigenous to Egypt, but had performed an important sacerdotal and governmental role in this country. This race kept its distance from the common people, blending only with the aristocratic classes, and the scholar associated them with the Shemsu Hor, the disciples of Horus. The Shemsu Hor are recognized as the dominant sacerdotal caste in pre-dynastic Egypt until approximately 3000 BC, being mentioned in the Turin Papyrus and the list of the kings of Abydos. Professor Emery wrote of his finds in Archaic Egypt, Culture and Civilization in Egypt 5,000 years ago. Towards the end of the 4th millennium BC, the people known as the disciples of Horus appear as a highly dominant aristocracy that governed entire Egypt. The theory of the existence of this race is supported by the discovery in the pre-dynastic tombs in the northern part of Higher Egypt of the anatomical remains of individuals with bigger skulls and builds than the native population, with so much difference to exclude any hypothetical common racial strain. The fusion of the two races must have come about in ages that concurred, more or less, with the unification of the two Egyptian kingdoms. The racial origin of these invaders is not known, and the route they took in their penetration of Egypt is equally obscure. We find that at the dawn of the historic period, Egypt was divided into the two rival kingdoms of the north and the south, both ruled by a royal house and aristocracy of the same race and both known traditionally as the followers of Horus, the demigods of Manetho's history. According to the ancient so-called building texts found at the Temple of Edfu in Egypt, the Shemsu Hor, or disciples of Horus, were a race of highly endowed sages who dwelt on 10 pre-Diluvian islands. One of their elders was Thoth, known to the Greeks as Hermes and Romans as Mercury. Great were my people in the ancient days, great beyond the conception of the little people now around me, knowing the wisdom of old, seeking far within the heart of infinity knowledge that belonged to earth's youth. Wise were we with the wisdom of the children of light who dwelt among us. Strong were we with the power drawn from the eternal fire. And of all these, greatest among the children of men was my father, Thoth, keeper of the great temple, link between the children of light who dwelt within the temple and the races of men who inhabited the 10 islands. The term Shemsu derives most probably from Akkadian shamash, meaning serpent. The word is similar to Irish Seamus and English James. We believe the term Hor for Horus, the falcon or hawk-headed god of the sun, represented the Ari or Aryans. The letter H was often used in the same way as the or le in French. Therefore, Har or Hari was the Ari. As a symbol, the hawk primarily signified spiritual status. The name Harris or Harrison from Har meant hawk or son of the hawk. Ralph Ellis has found evidence supporting the idea that the Giza Plateau and its 3 pyramids were perpetually protected by a special guard known as the Horites. These Horites, although disparaged in the Bible, are believed to be associated with the mysterious city of Petra, located near Mount Seir. Petra dates from a relatively late period what was probably built upon a more ancient site. Nearby are sophisticated irrigation systems and a strange serpent mound identical to those found in France and Britain. There can be little doubt that the Horites were descended from the ancient Shemsu Hor, the disciples of Horus. The word Har signified the hawk and the god Horus. The term is still employed today. A good example is the Air Force jet known as the Harrier. The first version of the warplane was even known as the Hawker. As said, the root Har or Hor refers to Horus and the sun. Ellis maintains that this mysterious sect of specially appointed guards was despised by the Hyksos people, who were none other than the Israelites of the Bible. He also maintains that one of the ancient names for Great Pyramid was Seir, a word connoting the west. If Ellis's translations are correct, as we believe them to be, could not Mount Horeb of the Bible refer to the pyramids rather than to some ill-defined, spuriously remote location? Was the pyramid the mountain of light, or more correctly, mountain of the men of light? In the year 1907, the Egyptian government decided to raise the level of the Great Aswan Dam in southern Egypt by 7 meters. The project meant the destruction by flooding of acres of land containing many burial grounds and tombs. A hurried examination of the bodies from some Nubian tombs was made by Sir Grafton Elliot Smith, who soon discovered, to his amazement, that the skulls and bones of the bodies under examination were different from those of the inhabitants of Nubia and Egypt, even though there were Egyptian characteristics to the physiognomy. In his book The Royal Mummies, published in 1912, Smith wrote of his strange alien finds. The alien people present many striking features of contrast which sharply differentiate them from the population of Egypt and Nubia. In height they do not differ in any marked degree, but their crania are shorter and considerably broader than those of the indigenous people. The nose is much narrower, more prominent, and high-bridged than that of the Egyptian or Nubian, and in comparison with the latter, the nasal spine is much more prominent. Nobody knows just who these blue-eyed, fair-skinned people were, or even where they came from. Anthropologically, they were termed Caucasians. And that was from Gerald O'Farrell, The Tutankhamun Deception. These people, Elliot Smith concluded, were more intelligent enough more than intelligent enough to accomplish the amazing building feats that the modern world marvels at the banks of the Nile. Enough exists to show that the Nordic gods were the same as the gods of the Levant. The gardens, halls, warfare, altars, sacrifices, marriage, and family life were the same. And that's from a book called The Priesthood of the Eles. We believed the decision to flood the sacred Nubian plains of the northern Sudan was a ploy to conceal the burial grounds of the Western peoples who had influenced Egyptian culture. In ancient times, Nubia was an independent region considered sacred by the Egyptians, who thought of it as the realm of the gods. The Nile flowed down through the mountains of Nubia, and so anyone buried in that area, by request or by tradition, were very esteemed. The Caucasian features described by Sir Eliot Smith are to be seen on the face of Queen Nefertiti, her sister Mutnojemet, wife of Pharaoh Horemheb, and daughter Meritaten, also known as Skota. Indeed, there is little doubt in my mind that Nefertiti and her family were of Western ancestry. This explains why Skota, her eldest daughter, traveled to Ireland by way of Spain after the fall of Akhenaten's corrupt dynasty, and why her grave was found not in Egypt but in Ireland's County Kerry. When modern academics composed reference books about early Egyptian history, they scrupulously avoided mention of the impressive body of ancient evidence attesting to the celestial rulers of pre-dynastic Egypt. And that was a quote by Tony Bushby, The Secret in the Bible. The 20th prayer of the 141st chapter of the ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead is dedicated to the goddess greatly beloved with red hair. The pre-dynastic Egyptians, that is to say, that stratum of them which was indigenous to North Africa, belonged to a white or light-skinned race with fair hair, who in many particulars resembled the Libyans, who in later historical times lived very near the western bank of the Nile. Among the ancient crania from the Thebaid, in the collection with the Department of Human Anatomy at Oxford, there are specimens which must unhesitatingly be considered to be those of Nordic type. Ancient Egypt, for instance, was essentially a penetration of Caucasoid racial elements into Africa. And that was by Robert Gare, Miscellaneous Racial Studies. The mummy was mostly unwrapped and on its back. Strands of reddish blonde hair lay on the floor beneath the bald head. There's a description of a find by the excavator of the tomb of Queen Hatshepsut. There was a queen, Nitocris, braver than all the men of her time, the most beautiful of all the women, blonde-haired with rosy cheeks. By her, it is said, the third pyramid was reared with the aspect of a mountain. And that was a quote by Manetho, a 3rd century Greco-Egyptian historian. According to the Greco-Roman authors Pliny the Elder, Strabo, and Diodorus Siculus, the third pyramid was built by a woman named Rhodopis. When translated from the original Greek, her name means rosy-cheeked. You can say the face of royal personage Nofret from a statue in 1871, dating from the early 4th dynasty, which was 2575 to 2467 BC. And here on the right, an Egyptian woman with distinctly Caucasian features. Images of even earlier white bearded men have been discovered in nearby Libya, which, like Egypt, was once lush and fertile. You can see these aren't African features here at all. The first pharaoh of the first dynasty of Egypt and founder of the great city of Memphis, King Menes, is buried in northern Ireland. Also known as Aha-Men and Hor-Aha, Fighting Hawk, Menes was most likely a prestigious member of Egypt's first civilization, the remnants of which were discovered by Professor Walter Emery and founded by the disciples of Horus, the sun god. In one ancient text from his empty tomb, discovered by Sir Flinders Petrie at Abydos in 1900, Menes is referred to as King Manash of the Sunhawk race. It is not surprising, therefore, that he should have wished to travel to Ireland, the original homeland of his ancestors. Most pathetically tragic of all, perhaps, is the discovery that the hitherto unread long record inscribed on the great ebony label found in the tomb of Menes at Abydos in Upper Egypt, and written in the Sumerian script and language of his time, narrates in graphic and circumstantial detail how this great admiral and world emperor in his old age, on a voyage of exploration with his fleet, made the complete course to the furthest west sunset land in the Western Ocean, and there met his tragic death, and it states that his tomb in Egypt remained empty and was merely a cenotaph, and the place name of the island in the far Western Ocean, which appears to read Urani, suggests the place of his death and real tomb as Erin, or Ireland. The king Monash of the sunset, or upper or western waters and their lands and oceans, the ruler of the sun-hawk race, the pharaoh, the deceased, the commander-in-chief of ships, made the complete course to the end of the sunset land, going in ships. He completed the inspection of the western lands. He built there and holding, or possession, in Urani land. At the lake of the peak, fate pierced him by a hornet, or wasp. This board tablet set up of a hanging wood is dedicated to his memory. That was from the funerary label of King Menes, translated by L.A. Waddell. The final resting place of Menes was discovered by Professor Waddell at Knockmenes, on the southern part of County Tyrone, not far from Lough Erne. Inscriptions found on boulder stones at the site were in Sumerian script identical to that found at Menes' empty Egyptian tomb site. Professor Waddell wrote of his unique and momentous finds. In particular, the photograph of one of the stones contains the same monogram of the name Urani and is written in the same signs as on the ebony label, but on a larger scale, and the realistic pictograph of the animal which caused the death of Menes in Urani represented it as a hornet. I have demonstrated elsewhere that representations of this end of the sunset land occur in Ireland, engraved on prehistoric cup-marked stones at Newgrange on the Boyne River near Drogheda, which are essentially replicas of the same pictograms as in the early Sumerian and Hittite sacred seals. King Menes of Sumeria and Egypt is referred to in the Hindu Puranas as Asa Manj, the far shooter, a title that reminds us of Old Testament Saul and David, and of Irish sun god Lu, wielder of the great lance and entitled the Long Arm. Asa meant strong or valiant. In the Hindu Mahabharata, Menes is Manasiyu, whose title was Prabhu. This term comes from Prahu, Parahu or Para, the possible origin of Pharaoh. The Hindi word meant chief or father. Menes' identification with the hawk god Horus is suggestive, since Horus was often referred to as the blue-eyed god. Egyptian queen Tea Tefi lies near Tara, a location some believe to be named after her. The name is believed to derive from Temer or Timor, meaning mound of tea, or mound of Tea. However, it probably derives from Ti Ari, after Ari or Eri, supreme goddess of pre-Celtic Druids. Mummified Barbary apes were discovered at Navan in Ireland, and entries concerning places in Ireland have been found in Egyptian papyri. British Israelites believe that the tomb of the prophet Jeremiah is also to be found in Ireland, at Lough Crew in County Meath, and believe him to have brought to Tara the coronation stone, the stone of fall, upon which Irish chieftains were crowned. However, when anecdotes such as this are broached, scholars are quick to say there may have been commerce between Egypt, Phoenicia, and Ireland after all. The majority of this commerce is dated to between 600 BC and 700 AD. Another quote. Jeremiah fled thither after the siege of Jerusalem, carrying away the treasures of the temple, such as the ark, the scepter of David, the Urim and Thummim, and others. Some persons at this day affect to believe that in the hill of Tara might yet be found these memorialisms of Judaism, and hope to rediscover thence David's harp, carried to Ireland by Jeremiah and the Princess Scota, daughter of Pharaoh. It was by James Bonwick from Irish Druids and Old Irish Religions. Is it really far-fetched to suppose Egyptian theology, particularly that of Upper Egypt, to be Western in origin? We do not think so.
As Augustus Le Plongeon, Ignatius Donnelly, Barry Fell, and others have shown, the Irish traveled to America long before other groups and were plying their trade and building settlements hundreds of years before the arrival of Columbus. We surmise that these historical Celts who visited the Americas were merely following in the footsteps of great mariners who had ventured forth in earlier times. Their mounds and megaliths bear inscriptions and dedications to the gods of light. Many Algonquin Indian words are identical not only to Gaelic words, but to Egyptian ones. The image of the Egyptian Eye of Ra has been found near to images of the Irish stag-horned god Cernunnos. Prehistoric Irish designs have been discovered in Oklahoma and Florida, and proof of sea voyages between Europe, Britain, and South and North America has come to light, revealing just how inaccurate are the official records of history. That the Irish, Gauls, Phoenicians, and Egyptians frequented the east coast of North America, and that they were in close relation to one another, proves they had close dealings in Europe and Asia. All doubt upon the matter is dispelled once we objectively examine the evidence. Maat, the mother of Thoth, was the goddess of mathematics, geometry, harmony, balance, and justice. She was known as Mary, from which we get the biblical Mary, mother of Jesus. Maat was considered the mother of the pharaohs, who embodied her principles and officiated for her. An Irish name for Druidism is Maethys, and that includes the Egyptian dual called Thoth and Mat. The eye of the great God, the eye of the God of glory, the eye of the King of hosts, the eye of the King of life, shining upon us through time and tide, shining upon us gently and without stint. Glory to thee, O splendid sun, glory to thee, O sun, the face of the God of life. And that was an ancient Irish hymn. Egypt is highly unusual in that the early craftsmanship and construction from the Old Kingdom are the finest, and the quality and dimensions of each monument reduces from then on throughout the following millennia. Quote from Ralph Ellis, Eden in Egypt. These temples were not dedicated to any one particular monarch, nor to any one particular god. They were instead dedicated to the observation and the study of the universe. The original theology and ritual of the megalithic priesthood demanded that there were no idols, no imagery, and no inscriptions, as the design of these monuments was not supposed to give away the identity of the architects or builders. After a close study of Egyptian relics and paintings in museums and private collections, and after a perusal of the works of leading Egyptologists and excavators, researcher Mary Sutherland, who was unable to account for what she discovered, managed to catalog a few key examples concerning the anomaly of the Western European presence on the land in the land of the Nile. Only the mummies of very few pharaohs have survived at the 20th century, but a large proportion of these are blonde. Crafton Smith mentions the distinct red hair of the 18th dynasty mummy Henut Mehet. The Egyptians have left us many paintings and statues of blondes and redheads. Amenhotep III's tomb painting shows him as having light red hair. Also, his features are quite Caucasian. A farm scene from about 2000 BC in the tomb of the nobleman Mekhetri shows a redhead. The tomb of Mena in the 18th dynasty at western Thebes shows blonde girls. The god Horus is usually depicted as white. He is very white in the Book of the Dead of Lady Cheretwebsehet, 21st dynasty, found in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. The eye of Horus, the so-called Wedjat eye, is always blue. The Greek author Plutarch, in the 22nd chapter of his De Isidi et Osiridi, states that the Egyptians thought Horus to be fair-skinned and the god Seth to be of ruddy complexion. The mummies of Ramses II and Prince Uaa have fine, silky yellow hair. The mummy of another pharaoh, Thothmes II, has light chestnut-colored hair. Microscopic examination showed that the hair roots contain natural red pigments and that during his younger days, Ramses II had been a redhead. A very striking painting of a yellow-haired man hunting from a chariot can be found in the tomb of Userhet, royal scribe of Amenhotep II. The yellow-haired man is Userhet. The same tomb has paintings of blonde soldiers. The tomb of Mena also has a wall painting showing a blond man supervising two dark-haired workers scooping grain. Time Life Books put out a volume called Ramses II the Great. It has a good picture of the blonde mummy of Ramses II. Another picture can be found in his book X-Raying the Pharaohs. The picture on the jacket cover shows his yellow hair. The funerary stela, inscribed stone slab, of priest Remi clearly shows him as having red hair. A painting of the mother of Pharaoh Amenhotep IV in the 18th dynasty reveals that she had blonde hair, blue eyes, and a rosy complexion. Princess Ranofri, daughter of Pharaoh Thutmosis III, 18th dynasty, is depicted as a blonde in a wall painting that was recorded in the 19th century by the Italian Egyptologist Ippolito Rossellini. In 1929, archaeologists discovered the mummy of 50-year-old Queen Mariette Amun, another daughter of Thutmosis III. The mummy has wavy, light brown hair. Paintings of blondes and redheads have been found among the tombs at Thebes. Amenhotep III looks Northern European in his statue. A blonde woman was painted at the tomb of Djeser Kara Seneb in Thebes. A model of a ship from about 2500 BC is manned by 5 blonde soldiers. The goddess Nuit was painted as white and blonde. 2 statues from about 2570 BC found in the tombs at Medum show Prince Rahotep and his wife Nofret. He has light green eyes for stones. She has violet blue stones. A painting from Iteti's tomb at Saqqara shows a very Nordic-looking man with blonde hair. A painting at the tomb of Meresank III at Giza from about 2485 BC shows white skin and red hair. Paintings of people with red hair and blue eyes were found at the tomb of Baght in Beni Hassan. Many other tombs at Beni Hassan have paintings of individuals with blonde and red hair as well as blue eyes. An article in the leading British anthropological journal states that many mummies have dark reddish-brown hair. Professor Vacher de la Puge described a blonde mummy found at Al-Amra, which he says has the face and skull measurements of a typical Gaul or Saxon. The book History of Egyptian Mummies mentions a mummy with reddish-brown hair. A blonde mummy was found at Kawamil, along with many chestnut-colored ones. The first pharaoh, Narmer, also known as Menes, appears to be very Caucasian. The ever-important Isis was in fact one of these goddesses known by the title Mary. That goddesses were beloved or merry is obvious from an enigmatic spell that invokes the goddess greatly beloved with red hair, or her who is greatly beloved, the red-haired. The mummy of a young Amarna prince, which was discovered in an annex of the tomb of Amenhotep II, sports a very long, luxuriant side lock of hair. Strangely enough, this young prince was not only hairy, but his hair was also a ruddy brown color. Many of the officials, courtiers, and priests representing the upper class of Egyptian society, but not the royalty, looked strikingly like modern Europeans, especially long-headed ones. Bas-relief showing blonde-haired Queen Hetep-Heres II, daughter of King Cheops of the early 4th dynasty. And yeah, she's got blonde hair on her head. Alright, on the left here, King Horus, 1783 to 1633 BC, with gleaming blue-gray eyes, and an Egyptian noblewoman with dark hair and pale complexion. A red-haired corpse was found dating from the pre-dynastic period, 3300 BC, nicknamed Ginger. And here's Pharaoh Userkaf, 2465 to 2458 BCE, was an important king of the 5th dynasty. His title was His Soul is Strong. His features are distinctly Caucasian. Notably, Userkaf was the first king of Egypt to begin the building of solar temples to the god Ra. The most striking are at Saqqara and Abu Sir. Userkaf's origins are considered uncertain. He may have been the son of the high priest of Memphis or even of Heliopolis, where some of the grandest solar temples stood. Egyptian artwork and sculpture reached a peak during his regency. Pharaoh Khephren of the 4th dynasty. Right here, he was the successor of Khufu, who is believed to have been the pharaoh who commissioned the building of the Great Pyramid at Giza. Khepren's features are clearly Caucasian, not African. The profile of Khephren right here. This pharaoh's face appears on the Egyptian sphinx that stands on the Giza plateau. Evidence shows that the texture of the face does not match the body, which means that the face was recarved probably more than once. We think the original face was that of a female. In any case, we believe the face of Khephren was deliberately defaced to conceal his strikingly Caucasian features. A solar cult dignitary, his title was He Who Appears Like Ra. Pharaoh Menkaure of the early 4th dynasty. Besides him stands an unnamed queen. Note their Western features. Queen Kia of the 18th dynasty, wife of Akhenaten and possibly of Pharaoh Horemheb. Her thin lips and aquiline appearance suggest she was Caucasian. Probably because of her obvious Western looks, Kia's ancestry is officially considered a mystery. Kia was Akhenaten's favorite wife and most likely the mother of Tutankhamun. Her name Kia is close to Hebrew Kiya, meaning life. When spelt Kava, the name gives the biblical Eve. Ahmose I was the first pharaoh of the 18th dynasty and conqueror of the Hyksos. His features are conspicuously Caucasian. And Ahmose Nefertari, wife of Ahmose I, is depicted with black skin for symbolic reasons, not because she was naturally black. The color was the symbol of Egypt or Kem, the black land, and symbolized the fertility and antiquity of the land. Black was also the color associated with Amen, chief god worshipped by the pharaohs of this era. Amen was the hidden or invisible one. Nefertari was entitled second prophet of Amen. The idea of blackness was adopted by the Masons. One of the pillars of the Temple of Solomon, Sol Amen, was black in color. Nefertari's name contains the term Tari, which is distinctly Irish. The Egyptians could recognize and depict Negroid features as well as we can today. Here we clearly see from Tutankhamun's own tomb walking sticks featuring likenesses of the conquered enemies of the land. These are so-called prisoner canes depicting foreign races subjugated by the Egyptians. The enemy has been taken in hand, so to speak. Notice the black and Asiatic features of the figures. Similar images are found on the pharaoh's sandals. Egypt's nobility are not depicted like this. The evidence against Afrocentrism is indisputable to rational, unbiased observers. To this very day, Christians end prayers with the word Amen. This word is Egyptian for sure and refers to ancient sun god Amen-Ra, worshipped at Thebes. Interestingly, however, the word Amen from Amentet meant western or western side. It also refers to the shadowland or underworld, that is, to the realms of the dead. This symbolism arose not only from the fact that the sun perceptibly sank into darkness in the west, but from the racial memories of what had occurred in the northwestern lands that had once been veritable wastelands of death and decay. So the very name of the chief solar god of Egypt actually signified ancestral lands of the western hemisphere. The hieroglyphic for Amen was a straight vertical pole like the capital letter I, topped with a small sun disk with rays. This revealing hieroglyphic of Amen was also known as Men, meaning monument, mountain, or simply block of stone or obelisk. I suggest that this glyph referred to the ancestral homelands in the west that housed the great and distinctive megalithic temples of stone that had stood vertically in the manner described by the Egyptian Amen hieroglyphic. As scholars of Celtic history will be quick to discern, the image of the sun rising above a tall ithyphallic stone perfectly describes the spectacle occurring to this day at many solar temples in England and Ireland, specifically at Stonehenge and Newgrange. At Stonehenge, the sun rises above the famous heel stone. The word heel comes from Hele or Helios, meaning sun. The hieroglyphic expressed that Amen, the sun god, his priesthood and worship originated in western lands. That these lands were the end place where the sun god rested every evening was the reason why prayers ended with the word Amen to signify termination. One of the words for prayer was orison, that clearly resembles horizon. Again, the references to both geography and astrotheology. That the Amen hieroglyphic should connote the ancient megalithic sun temples of England and Ireland is not so strange once it is realized that Stonehenge and other important British sites have conclusively been shown to be geometrically and geomantically aligned to the Great Pyramid at Giza. We surmise that certain prime megalithic sites of Britain are also aligned with Egyptian temples, and that the secret theosophy of Irish Druidism was central to the theology of the Theban Ominous, as well as the sun priests of Lower Egypt. The Egyptians simply duplicated the solar symbolism and geometric principles of the Western megaliths with their Great Pyramid. Amen, the sun, rose above their mountain of stone at Giza in the same way as it did in the original Western homelands of Amen. Osiris sails through the underworld on his solar boat. He was the god of earth and the dead. He represented the natural cycles of birth and death. His dismemberment recalled the cataclysms and paroxysms that visited the world, and which were particularly devastating to the northwestern hemisphere. The root of his name, Sur, meant the west. Indeed, one name for Osiris was Wesir, which is remarkably similar to the present spelling of west. It is my belief that the entire cult of Osiris was transported to Egypt from Britain. Wesir, Osiris, is known to have replaced Kentatmentiu, whose name meant foremost of the Westerners. As Isis, Ast, represented the East, so did her husband, Asir, represent the West. Scholars accept without question that the Greeks and Romans fused several deities together to form individual members of their own pantheons. Serapis, Dionysus, Mithras, and even Zeus were composites of archaic Egyptian and Sumerian gods. The Egyptians were not above the same plagiarization. Many of their gods and goddesses were fusions of more ancient figures. This is particularly true of Hathor, Ptah, Osiris, and Horus. Scholars readily accept that the Greeks and Romans borrowed their gods from Egypt. They are, however, not as receptive to the idea that the Egyptians had done something similar. The Western origins of Egyptian cultural elements is not to be broached or considered. Osiris on his boat gives us the visual impression that this god was indeed from beyond the sea. He frequented the underworld, and that was not, as we are meant to believe, merely a conceptual realm. It was a physical region. It was the ancestral lands of the Northwest ruined by natural upheaval. It was the land of the setting sun, of darkness and death, into which the sun, Osiris, retired or returned at day's end. The enemy of Osiris and his son Horus was the serpentine Typhon. This is where we get the word typhoon. The serpentine deity Typhon or Apophis was a mythographic adversary representing the destructive force of nature. Osiris traveled west every night to sacrificially enter into combat with the evil serpent and ensure that such incomprehensible cataclysm should never reoccur. This fact is further reinforced when we remember that the main symbol of Osiris was the Djed pillar. The fallen column is shown being ritually reset in its vertical position. This rite of lifting the pillar of Osiris into upright position encapsulated the same idea of which we speak. It represented the restoration of order and stability after a time of worldwide calamity. Osiris was associated and even fused with Old Kingdom gods Seker or Sokar. Seker was depicted as a mummified deity, falcon or hawk-headed, with green skin representing rebirth. Of course, the green coloring parallels the Irish Hern or Cernunnos, god of nature. Seker was often shown hovering on wings above the body of the deceased. He was, therefore, the basis of the Christian Holy Spirit. Anubis was one of the oldest gods of Egypt and closely associated with Osiris and Horus. Some traditions have him as the brother of Horus and some of Nephthys, the sister of Isis. He was largely based on the most ancient jackal-headed god known as Khenta Mentiu, worshipped in Upper Egyptian cities as Abydos and Saqqara. Suggestively, this name means foremost of the Westerners. Mentiu or Mentu was a hawk-headed god thought to have been the early precursor of Horus. His title was the Nomad, which implies a distant god of foreign origin. We conclude that many of Egypt's pre-dynastic gods had Western origins. Egyptians understood this Anubis as lord of the western lands and hemisphere. This also meant he was ruler of the dead. Egyptians associated the underworld with the lands beyond the western horizon, the zone of Horus, not only because the sun set there, but because of the terrible ruin that had been suffered by the lands of the northwest. Those who still find it impossible or far-fetched to suppose that Egyptian religion and culture was influenced by foreigners from Western lands should bear in mind that historians already accept that Western Indo-Europeans contributed cultural elements to northern India. They should bear in mind that the Muslims of Persia and Yemen brought to India highly sophisticated cultural elements as they established their Mughal dynasty, and that Buddhism, born in India, moved eastward to dramatically influence and enrich Chinese culture. They had best remember the fact that during the early centuries of the Christian era, up until the Middle Ages, Chaldean monks traveled throughout Europe from Ireland in their capacity as educators of nobility. Yes, Marco Polo could travel to China, as all agree he did. Abaris could make his way from Ireland to the Athenian school of Pythagoras, and Apollonius of Tyana could travel to India to locate the schools and ashrams of the Brahmins. Ancient Irishmen could travel eastward and settle in Scotland, giving that country its distinctive name. Such cases are not doubted, but speak of traversal in the opposite direction and one is met with a wall of resistance. It has taken centuries for academics to begrudgingly entertain this simple idea, although ultimately it is still tantamount to academic heresy to pronounce Egypt to be the cradle of civilization and originator of Christian theology. Nonetheless, academics will sooner muse over and ratify commerce from east to west than endorse traversal from west to east. Indeed, this rarer kind of speculation, first asserted by Comyns Beaumont, Anna Wilkes, Ignatius Donnelly, and Connor McDarry, is quite taboo. Nevertheless, the reason why members of the Egyptian nobility were returned in Ireland is simply because Ireland was an ancestral homeland to which they were returning. It was from the British Isles that their forefathers had come bearing the knowledge that enabled Egypt's fine civilization to form. It was Western science that brought about the construction of the Great Pyramid and Sphinx. No other race was responsible for their construction. The world endures a mystery concerning their origins because the true architects have been forced into the shadows of history. The Druidical religion prevailed not only in Britain, but likewise all over the East. And that is the end of the chapter. Thank you guys for staying with me. I'm a little Irish lassie, Isla Spring, is hanging out with me right now. And yeah, basically I'll be continuing this, but you can see that basically there's major archaeological evidence showing that the pharaohs and the aristocracy of Egypt, especially in the pre-dynastic period, was Western European in their appearance and their description and their representation across the board. And when we look etymologically, the language is extremely similar. And basically, we can demonstrate that there was a vast seafaring ability on the part of these people, and they were able to travel basically around the entire world. So that's my video. I'll be coming up with part 2 soon here, as soon as I can. Also, I got this new webcam. If anybody wants to do a call or an interview or conversation, just hit me up, send me a message, and we'll make it happen. So till next time, I hope you guys have a great day, and yeah, I'll see you next time. Cheers.
Ah.